On Primetime Politics, getting down to business.
A core priority of this government is to build projects of national significance, projects that reinforce our country's resilience.
Mark Carney campaigned on building major infrastructure and energy initiatives to secure this country's future. But his first hurdle could be the country's premiers. Coming up, the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs will look ahead to next week's meeting of the Canadian First Ministers. We'll examine how it could be the make or break moment for the Prime Minister's ambitious agenda. Also, former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne will hear why she thinks calling a First Minister's meeting was a good move for Carney. And making Canada an energy superpower. We'll speak to the Business Council of Alberta. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. The Prime Minister ended his week by addressing the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, capping up what has been a very busy 5 days that started out with a royal visit and a speech from the throne. But through it all, Mark Carney continuing to signal his intent to build projects of national significance, with the Conservative leader saying it's still not enough.
A core priority of this government is to build projects of national significance, projects that reinforce our country's resilience, projects that connect Canada, projects that partner with Indigenous peoples, that diversify our trading partners and create a more sustainable future for all.
These sort of like picking 5 or 10 projects that the government favors, it might be better than nothing, but it's not the solution that we need to get things built. We need to repeal C-69, C-48, the energy cap, the electric vehicle mandate, and unlock the incredible power of our resources to build powerful paychecks, and most importantly, to make us independent and self-reliant from the Americans.
Well, the debate will probably continue as the Prime Minister now turns his attention to next week's First Minister's meeting. And to talk about this, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. Hi, Michael.
Nice to see you guys again. So listen, as I said, the week began busily with a lot of pomp and circumstance with the visit of the King. It now turns into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of things as the Prime Minister sits down with the country's premiers. Bob, start us out here. How important will this meeting of the premiers be for Mark Carney to make sure what he's trying to pursue is either a success or a failure?
Well, look, he has a very ambitious agenda, and to get this agenda going, he's going to need a lot of cooperation from the provincial premiers and territorial leaders. And we always know, because we're all old hands at federal provincial affairs, that that is often a very difficult group of people to be able to deal with. The most important thing that he's going to be able to talk to them right away with saying, we're going to bring down the federal barriers to interprovincial trade, which is really insignificant, because the real issue has to do with the provinces, whether they will be able to do that. They're the ones that are going to make the real difference, and the jury is out on that happening. And then the most important thing from Mr. Carney's perspective is trying to get buy-in from the provincial premiers on what kind of nation-building projects that they can more or less agree to so that we can get them started. And he has already, we know that very quickly after this there's going to be legislation passed that's going to try to get these projects off the ground within a 2-year approval process, which is very, that's a really fast approval process, because lately we're looking at 10 years or in that neighborhood. And so it's a very significant thing. It can make a big difference if we can get our resources of natural gas, our oil, our critical minerals out of the ground and to global markets. It could make a big difference to jobs in this country, to our GDP, and to our productivity. So, but look, it's not going to be easy, because you're going to have environmental groups and some Indigenous groups going to the courts. You're going to have the Bloc Québécois and the NDP opposing some of this stuff. Yeah. So this will be the test of how transformative leader Mark Carney can be.
Yeah, transformative, and as you say, he has all these players. You know, and Bob touched upon it a bit, Tonda, in terms of the potential obstacles here. You know, not only with the premiers, but when you look at the individual provinces, they have tried to do their own forms of fast tracking, and they have encountered their own opposition and obstacles. When the Prime Minister says he wants to do this quickly, he wants to accomplish these projects, how difficult is that actually going to be for him?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, a lot of people over the past number of months, in the face of the Trump threat, have paid lip service to the importance of breaking down barriers, reducing red tape and regulation, and allowing the country to develop its economy. But I see, you know, there be dragons in some respect for the Prime Minister, in the sense of there are Indigenous groups that expect more than just this government to be firmly guided by the principle of consulting with them and working with them. Some of them feel that, you know, their say is important. It amounts to a veto. Does it or doesn't it? I don't think it does. And so there's not just that. I mean, Francois Legault has already sort of also weighed in. You know, he wants the federal government to contribute funding to a big hydroelectric development that he signed on to with Newfoundland up in Labrador. But that's billions and billions and billions of dollars. And Carney has made clear that he's out to reduce the red tape, but he's not out to kick in billions and billions and billions of dollars to everybody's pet project. So, look, I think that the devil is in the details this week. Carney has, on Friday, told the mayors that he's interested in high-speed rail, he's interested in port infrastructure, linking municipalities to ports. Is he interested in electrical corridors, or is he interested in pipelines? Is he interested in oil pipelines or gas pipelines? Have the private sector, have private companies put forward ideas as well, and will they kick in the dollars necessary? I think really a lot is riding on the specifics we hear this week out of Saskatoon.
Yeah, so without a doubt, an important meeting. But, you know, Tonda raises Joël-Denis Francois Legault, the Quebec Premier. But we also heard from Yves-François Blanchet, who has already said that the Bloc Québécois will oppose any project that adds to like global emissions. Talk to us about the kind of opposition, not just politically with the Bloc Québécois, but also within Quebec, you know, because Quebec really supported the Liberals. It is a big reason why Mark Carney was able to save the party and not have them relegated to the opposition benches. How is this going to fly in Quebec, the type of opposition that Mark Carney is going to have to navigate there?
I think it is diminishing the kind of opposition we saw in the past in Quebec towards pipeline, the construction of pipelines. The context of the relationship between Canada and the United States changed the dialogue in Quebec. Yes, the Bloc Québécois will remain opposed to it because it's fundamentally a party that wants to separate from Canada, but also oppose pipelines. So that's not a new thing that they're saying. Well, François Legault is more open-minded to pipelines, namely pipelines for natural gas. And for Mr. Carney, I think he's got a game plan, but he needs supports from other players to make it happen. And I think for it to happen, he's got big ambitions, but he will have to start with small steps. He's talking about a national energy corridor, for example. The small steps will be to build a national corridor between Alberta and the Port of Churchill, for example. And Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, may be a key player in that big scheme of things. Why? He's a Premier in Manitoba, NDP, but also from Aboriginal communities. And so he's got some credibility, political capital that he wants to spend, and he's talking about, you know, providing the financial support to make sure that the Port of Churchill, for example, in Manitoba is developed and is linked to a national energy corridor that could eventually link to the Ring of Fire in Ontario. So you've got some pieces going together, start small, but expand afterwards, because if you go too big, you may fail, and that's what one of the key challenges for Mr. Carney, because he's been raising expectations about delivering a lot in a short time. That, you know, we may face some roadblocks towards.
Yeah, face some roadblocks. But, you know, as we kind of look to these potential obstacles that the Prime Minister will encounter, he's also experiencing challenges here in Ottawa within his own caucus, within his own office, because from all reports that this is a caucus that still has some level of disunity in it. This is a Prime Minister that still is having a hard time finding a chief of staff, and what does that mean about internal staffing? And even reports of people getting getting out of meetings, I guess, in tears because they're being taken to task for not being prepared enough for their meetings with the Prime Minister. Bob, just how difficult of a situation internally is it right now for the Prime Minister?
Well, in terms of the caucus, there are a good number of members of Parliament who are concerned about pipeline development and greenhouse gas emissions, so he's going to have to manage that. And in terms of his own office, well, we know from the way he ran the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada that he's a hard taskmaster. He expects people to show up, to be dressed properly, to know their briefs, and if they don't, they will hear about it. You know, I don't have a problem with that, frankly. You know, we've got a lot of big issues on the table that need to be dealt with, and the Prime Minister expects people to come to work and to be prepared and to work hard. And yeah, it's going to, you know, a lot of people are not going to like that. We've all worked for bosses who have expected us to up our game, and this is what you're going to get with him.
Tonda, what are you hearing?
Well, I mean, all of us have heard these stories. All of us have heard, you know, stories of people walking into meetings late and being berated for it, or not being ready and up on their files and being expected to deliver, you know, data and evidence to bolster their arguments. But as Bob said, I mean, part and parcel of it is he's telling the country it has to move at a quick speed, but he's also telling the government and the caucus to move at a quick speed. And to your question about internal dissent, frankly, most of that caucus wouldn't be where it is today under a Justin Trudeau-led party, according to everything we thought was true 6 months ago. And so if they're in power again right now, albeit with a minority, it's in large measure because of Carney. So, you know, I think he's got a lot of political capital to spend in the country, but also within his own caucus to stifle some of that dissent. I think that, I don't think that the Canadian public will be too tolerant of whiners.
Joël-Denis.
And we're told that some cabinet ministers know already that they are on a leash, in the sense that they need to produce results quickly, as the Prime Minister expects them, and he will not hesitate to shuffle his cabinet within 8 months or 10 months or a year if some of them are not performing to his taste. So he's sending a signal from the top to the bottom, and that includes the bureaucracy, that he wants to move faster. No more, in French I say, no more tatouinage. That means you don't waste your time with him, otherwise you're going to be doing something else the next day. And that, I think, is a clear sign that he wants to do a lot of business, a lot of stuff, a lot of policies implemented, and he's a go-getter. So we'll see. If
he's able to deliver, say within 12 months, on a whole bunch of these deals he's promising, and manages to somehow negotiate some kind of settlement with the Trump administration, I can totally see him within 12 to 18 months going back to the electorate and seeking a majority mandate. And, you know, that's speculative, of course it is. Stop that. But, you know, look, he's got to deliver too. He's set the bar really high, not just for them, but for himself. In the eyes of the voters, he has talked in hyperbolic language since he came on the scene. So, biggest transformation of the economy since World War II, you know, lead the G7, lead the world on transforming global alliances. If Trump won't lead, those are pretty tall standards. If that's his metric, and he's going to be graded by that, well, sure, bring it.
Yeah, and it's also been noted, you know, I've heard it say he wants to accomplish things quickly, but he has to accomplish things quickly in order to justify the mandate that he asked for Canadians to give him, as you say. So a lot to be watching, and of course we'll be covering Saskatoon very closely for the First Minister's meeting. But before we go, I want to acknowledge the fact that Robert Fife will be receiving an award. I know you didn't know this was going. Why would I tell you? I want to surprise you.
I would have talked you out of it.
But this is the citation. At a time when journalism is under fire around the world, it is even more important that we honor great Canadian journalists who work tirelessly to uncover the truth, keep us informed, and inspire future generations of journalists to do the same. And this is from the Michener Awards Foundation. We are thrilled to recognize Mr. Fife for his extraordinary lifelong contributions to our profession. That award announced, I think, last week, and then you'll be receiving it next next week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I say bravo to that.
Yeah, so bravo to you. The ceremony is actually at Rideau Hall. The Governor General will be there. So Robert Fife will be future recipient of the Michener Award. So bravo. Robert Fife.
When I congratulated him, I told him he can retire now.
No. I'm not refiguring this panel. This panel stays. Okay. Bob, Tonda, JD, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a great weekend. Well, let's get back to next week's meeting of Canada's First Ministers. Kathleen Wynne was Ontario's 25th Premier. She served from 2013 to 2018. She joins us right now. Ms. Wynne, good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, as we said, Prime Minister Carney, he really is intent on getting these national projects up and running. He wants to do so really in quick succession. What do you make of his decision to convene a meeting of the country's premiers along with him to essentially get things going rather than perhaps moving unilaterally from Ottawa?
Well, I think it's very wise, Michael. I think that having the premiers all in one room and hearing the same message and being able to engage with the Prime Minister is very wise, given the regional differences. And we know that there are some serious differences, particularly between some of the western provinces and the rest of the country. So I think that the Prime Minister, while he will be very directive, I suspect, I think he needs to establish those working relationships now that he is in this seat, and now that we know that we have to move forward on the projects that each of the premiers have put forward, and that the federal government is interested in making a priority.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about how tough these talks could be behind closed doors. How much of it's already settled, though? Because they really are coming into Saskatoon, spending a day before going out again. How much of this has already been preset? How much of it will be evolving on the ground, do you think?
Well, it's hard for me to know exactly, but I will say that while there obviously are lots of conversations between officials and staff before these meetings, there is a dynamic that happens at the table, and that dynamic is important. It's important in terms of the relationships among the premiers and then between the premiers and the Prime Minister. The premiers will all be watching to see how the Prime Minister interacts with each of them and with their colleagues, and particularly I think with Danielle Smith and Scott Moe, where there has been the most friction. So I think it's very, very important that we understand that good things can happen at this table. Of course, there can be a breakdown in communication, but good, positive collaboration can happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, Prime Minister Carney says he wants to pursue these projects that would essentially be pre-approved before beginning, approved in 2 years' time or less. How possible is that? You've been around the table. You know what it's like. How possible is a 2-year timeline when there are so many stakeholders involved? Is it a possibility to accomplish that?
Well, it's super ambitious for sure. You're correct to ask that question, and I think the expectations are very, very high. But that, to me, that is all the more reason that this meeting needs to take place, to see the extent to which the Prime Minister can get everybody on the same page. I suspect, Michael, that there will then need to be pretty serious conversations with Indigenous leaders from across the country, because if we look at what's happening in Ontario right now, we've got a Premier who has not done that consultation and who is trying to move ahead without respecting the input of Indigenous people, and that's not going to work. So I suspect that Prime Minister Carney has a plan to meet with Indigenous leaders, because that will be an important component of being able to move ahead in a respectful way.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, both Prime Minister Harper and Prime Minister Trudeau, they met with the premiers when their mandates began, but by the end, the First Ministers rarely gathered together. What's your advice to Mr. Carney about the effectiveness of these meetings and how these meetings might actually help him govern?
Well, I I think they are very important. And I never had the opportunity to be at a First Minister's meeting with Prime Minister Harper because he wasn't meeting with premiers by the time I became Premier in 2014. I did meet with Prime Minister Trudeau with the premiers more than once. I think that they are very important. I also think that right now they are probably more important than they have ever been, given the threat from the United States, given the need to build a strong economy that is unified across the country. I don't think that the Prime Minister can afford not to have an ongoing and close relationship with the premiers and a really substantial dialogue.
Kathleen Wynne, as I say, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael. Take good care.
You too. Well, when Mark Carney refers to projects of national interest, he's referring to major infrastructure and energy projects, in particular those that will secure Canada's future economic success and security. The Prime Minister has made reference to conventional energy as being a part of that. And yesterday, I did sit down with the President of the Alberta Business Council, who says the Prime Minister should be moving on pipelines. Listen, I hear what you have said. I was looking at actually an article that you wrote for The Hub, and you talk about how this Liberal government needs to prove that it's different than the Liberal government before it. Not only that, you say that this government needs to prove that difference quickly. Why?
Well, because the opportunity is in front of us and it's not going to be there forever. And you're seeing some of the frustrations of Albertans growing in terms of some of these separatist sentiments. So there's got to be a moment in time where we capture the imagination not only of the Prime Minister's ambition to be the strongest economy of the G7, to be an energy superpower, and to build things. We need to get that to happen soon. Otherwise, I worry about the state of the nation. I worry about unity. I worry about how, if we get a good deal with the United States, that some of the imperative, some of the urgency to do all of this stuff will start to fade away, and we can't lose the urgency. We have to capture it. It's a moment in time where I think Canadians are recognizing all of the things that we should have been doing over the past 10 or 20 years for the good of the country we haven't been doing, and it took the U.S. and the situation with the tariffs and President Trump to really highlight those. And a new government, I think, has a moment where they can do big and great things, but it doesn't last forever. It
doesn't last forever, as you say, and in fact, you have written to the Prime Minister outlining actions that he could take to get moving quickly, if you will. But that also includes, you write, a rethink of environmental policy. What needs to be revisited when you talk about environmental policy?
Unfortunately, the previous government thought that domestic emissions trumped all else. It trumped the economy, it trumped our commitment to our allies, it trumped our commitment to global greenhouse emissions reduction. So I think we need to take a much more global view. We need to take a view that the path to achieving the strongest economy of the G7 really flows through Canada's natural resource sector. But we can't develop the natural resource sector against the backdrop of the existing climate policy that we have, particularly as it relates to things like the proposed emissions cap, the greenwashing provisions, the clean electricity regulations. All of those things are making Canada highly uninvestable as a place to do natural resource projects, to do interprovincial power ties, etc. So we need to make Canada more competitive, largely with our biggest ally and customer of the South, the United States, because capital will go where it's less friction, greatest return. And in Canada's environmental policy, we've just created so many layers of problems that no capital is coming here. And we've seen that because very few projects are actually happening.
So where does environmental regulation fit in then, or at the very least environmental commitments? Because I don't have to tell you, it is those who are concerned about environmental outcomes that oftentimes oppose new projects and development of oil and gas.
Yeah, I'd say two things, Michael. The first and foremost is we should take, as Canadians, a global view of greenhouse gas emissions. And so there are many countries that have come to Canada asking for our LNG to offset higher emitting sources in their home countries, whether that's Japan, whether that is South Korea, whether that is Greece or Germany, and also add on to getting off of Russian gas. but we sent them home empty-handed. So what we need to do is think about if Canada can help offset higher emitting sources elsewhere,
like coal,
we may have to grow our domestic emissions, but on the big picture global basis, that means we'll reduce global emissions. So that's the first point. The second point is the way in which we can incent. None of my members in the private sector in Alberta want to do any environmental damage, but we've created an impact assessment process that really has made it so challenging and so cumbersome. So let's layer on a thoughtful, pragmatic, timely, efficient, and certain environmental review process with incentive on technology to reduce emissions on things like carbon capture and sequestration, and to strip away all of the other policy barriers and make it competitive, efficient for companies to invest in those technologies. The Prime Minister has said, Minister Hodgson has said, let's get this Pathways project done. Couldn't agree more. And the combination of those two things, I think.
And Pathways is carbon capture for people who don't know.
The carbon capture for the oil sands projects. Between those two things, I think Canadians can recognize Canada's got a competitive sector. Canada's working to reduce its emissions on an intensity basis in Canada, but we're also helping the world by providing cleaner sources of fuel elsewhere. The emissions globally will go down.
Mm-hmm. I also want to ask about Indigenous consultation, because in the throne speech that was read by King Charles earlier this week, there is clear reference in there about free, prior and informed consent for any national project that goes forward. How do you see Indigenous consultation working, but at the same time not delaying, which I believe is the criticism that we've heard, national projects like pipelines?
Some of the projects in the past have engaged Indigenous communities far too late in the process. It's been almost we've built the project from concept, and here we're coming into the communities, and it's time for you to sort of say yes to it. The better projects that are happening now, we're seeing with like Cedar LNG with the Haisla First Nation, we're seeing with the Similas and the Rockies LNG. All of these projects are working with the Indigenous communities from day one, from the ground up. They're talking about how do we work with your communities, how do we have enabled participation, so they're actually getting equity stakes in these projects, so they feel tied to it, they benefit from it, they're part of the journey, they're part of the success. And that is a way to do things better. And so we engage Indigenous nations from the very beginning as the project is even just becoming a concept in the minds of the corporate citizens, and find ways that they can share in the success of the projects. That will create, and has demonstrated in some of these other projects, a greater chance of buy-in and support, and you're seeing tremendous reconciliation happening. And what's going to the intergenerational prosperity that will happen in nations like the Haisla First Nation through the Cedar LNG project, that will create opportunities for generations to come. So doing it early on, doing it thoughtfully, doing it with an equity stake in it, those are some of the recipes for success, for better and more successful Indigenous participation engagement.
Listen, I have less than a minute here, but I do want to ask you, because the Carney government says it hopes to name the national projects it wants to move forward in a number of days. Which projects do you hope Ottawa actually champions?
Well, we're very aligned with the Western Premier proposal of the energy and resource corridors, getting projects, and that could be everything from pipelines, power line interties, rail for forest, agriculture, critical mineral projects, something that is all-encompassing, big picture, bold, and visionary. We align with that. We don't want to pick winners or losers necessarily with respect to any specific one project through one company, but let's think about these corridors that companies can rally behind. We can do multiple things in the same kind of zone and approach. And I think you'll see proponents come to the table if we also get the right policy environment to support investment.
So not single use, more than dual use, multiple use is what you see this corridor is doing.
Correct. I think those will be the recipe. Those will be fantastic projects. Nation building, national interest projects.
Adam, really appreciate the time. Thanks for talking to us while you're in Ottawa.
Thanks, Michael.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back next week. Until then, have a great weekend.